Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're all having a good day today. First of all, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to visit with me to learn about my new book, American Insanity. I also want to thank Dennis at Reader's Magnet and Reader's Magnet for all the help and support they have provided me in promoting my book. So I'm going to begin with telling you a little bit of my background. Then I'll tell you a little bit about my book. Who am I? I'm the oldest of 11 children and grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. After graduating from high school, I joined the Marine Corps, which landed me in Vietnam during 1965 and 1966. Having survived that experience, I returned home and went back to school and got my degree in healthcare administration. I then spent 29 years working for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a healthcare administrator. I served at 7 different VA healthcare facilities throughout the country before I transferred to the VA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I spent the last 11 years of that 29-year career at the VA headquarters in Washington, first as the Chief of Policies and Operation, then as the Acting Director of Health Administration Service. These positions required me to work closely with members of Congress and the White House staff regarding veterans' issues and concerns. These positions also required me to write responses to inquiries from Congress and the White House, and to respond to complaints and concerns from veterans and veterans organizations. I had to learn to write responses which were to the point and clearly address the issues presented. It was during those 11 years and being a part of that Washington bureaucracy that I began to really learn about the workings of the Washington bureaucracy and the real power that bureaucracy had over the governing of our country. In fact, I went to Washington very naive about our federal government, the politicians we elected to represent us, and who was really in control. Believing, like many, that those representing us were honorable people who governed and did so with our best interest at heart. Well, it didn't take long before I realized that most of what I believed about our government and those we elected was no more than an illusion. Following my retirement from the federal government, I served two two-year terms as a township councilman, 11 years as a volunteer firefighter and EMT, after which I entered into a business partnership with my oldest son, who's a senior master mechanic, and we operated and owned and operated our own business as an engine and transmission repair shop. This was the period in which I really learned just how crushing government regulations and taxations were on businesses. It was during my period as a volunteer firefighter that I was elected to the fire department's board of directors and then to the chair of that board. I am married to a wonderful woman who is a retired clinical social worker who had her own private practice in psychotherapy. We have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. After moving so many times, we finally settled down in the Smoky Mountains, just outside of Waynesville, North Carolina. So that's a little bit about my background. So now I'll tell you a little bit about my book. And after I tell you a little bit about my book, I'll answer some questions. And then after answering the questions, if there's any time, I'm going to read some excerpts from my book to give you a flavor of what you can expect. So, why did I choose the title American Insanity? I chose the title American Insanity because I felt that it best describes what I write about in my book, namely, all of the insanity occurring within our federal government with the current generation of our young adults and within our society in general. I wanted a title that represented the insanity of our unconstitutional and bloated federal bureaucracy, and a title that describes for the potential reader all the insane, corrupt, unconstitutional atrocities the government is committing against those it was created to serve. Subjects which I cover in American Insanity cover all of the above topics or issues that I just explained. I wrote American Insanity to help shed light on the level of corruption that exists within our federal government, the extent to which our federal government is abusing its powers, and the extent to which our federal government is infringing upon our constitutional rights. Information that is mostly unknown to the general public because our mainstream news media has become so politicized that they no longer report the news if it doesn't fit the ideology they support. Or if they do report that news, they report it in a slanted manner, again, to support their ideology. And so they no longer can be trusted to be a watchdog over our government by staying neutral in their reporting, which, by the way, is why our founding fathers included the freedom of the press in our Constitution. Actually, in the First Amendment. I wanted to bring to the attention of our citizens that information of government corruption the media's are failing to report or are reporting inaccurately. Having been a part of the Washington bureaucracy, or the swamp as many people refer to it, for 11 years, I am very familiar on how that swamp works. So it is that swamp and the corruption within that swamp that I address at length in my book. And I speak about how and why it is the swamp, not Congress, which really governs the United States. I begin my book, chapter 1, by asking questions that all of us are having about what is happening to our country and to our freedoms. And then I go on to address those questions in the following chapters. I'll be reading a few of those questions after I've finished telling you about my book. So stick around for that. Before I get to those excerpts, I want to point out that the issues I address in the book are broken down by departments, agencies, and individuals within our federal government. I do include a chapter in which I give a brief history of the creation of our Constitution, including the Constitution and affixed amendments in their entirety. Why do I do this? I do it because I know that the vast majority of American citizens have never read our Constitution. Therefore, they don't even realize what God-given constitutional rights they have and which God-given constitutional rights our government is attempting to take away from them. The vast majority of my book is really about the corruption and ineptness of those we have elected and those who are unelected servants of the people. I talk about how and why we have lost the respect of foreign nations and lost our rightful place on the world stage. I also include chapters in which I address the level of denigration our Constitution has suffered because of Supreme Court rulings and the outright ignoring of our Constitution by our corrupt government and the officials within that government. I continue with chapters in which I lay out how the federal government has been steadily overreaching its constitutional authority, how and why power-hungry Washington politicians and elitists are attempting to transform our states from sovereign entities into submissive subjects to the federal government, which very much conflicts with what the Constitution states. I include chapters which lay out the impact that our failed public school system is having on the future of our children and the future of our constitutional republic. As we all know, if our children are not taught about our government, our form of government, what it means, what it stands for, taught about patriotism, our constitutional republic is not going to last much longer. I address our open southern border and the real impact this is having on communities across the country. I explain how insane our national debt has become, how we got to this point, how we can regain control of that debt, and why it must be done now. and what this all means to the average American household. In other chapters, I lay out the extent to which our government is willing to go in order to silence American citizens with opposing viewpoints and why they're doing so. I include chapters that address how and why our two-party political system is failing us, America's insane shift from capitalism towards socialism, the attempts being made by the Washington elitists to push America towards a globalist nation, and what all of this would mean for our individual constitutional rights and our constitutional republic. I discuss the extent to which our federal government has been weaponized against its own citizens and how the government is failing to conduct their actions and decisions within the confines of the Constitution. I continue with chapters in which I attempt to provide a feel for why American voters have become so apathetic towards our government and why so many members of Congress so easily fall into the grips of corruption. In this last part, the members of Congress falling into corruption is something that I observed clearly while I was in Washington, D.C., and I explained why and how that happens and why they allow themselves to be sucked into that corrupt environment. In short, what I'm attempting to do is to wake people up to the harsh reality that is today's America. The last two chapters I dedicate to addressing the only real solutions available to us in order to save our constitutional republic. For example, within those two chapters, I discuss solutions such as the convening of a convention of states under Article 5 of the Constitution, and about election integrity and how important it is that each one of us become involved in helping to assure election integrity. I also include for both those solutions links to organizations that you can become involved with that are working really hard to turn America around to being the Christian conservative Constitution republic that the founding fathers intended for us to be. So you may wonder how long it took me to write this book. Well, because I had firsthand knowledge of my subject as a result of my time in Washington, D.C., working with the government, with the Congress, and with the White House. It took me about 9 months of research and writing. I've been writing political op-ed articles for various newspapers for many years now, and I did incorporate many of my op-ed articles, which I had written over the past 3 years, into my book, which very much helped me move forward much quicker. In fact, it was writing the op-ed articles that inspired me to write this book. And just to let everyone know, I'm currently working on my next book, which will be titled Government Gone Rogue, in which I will be addressing how and why our government has ceased to be a shield to protect its citizen and has become a weapon against its own citizens in order to subdue us into being subjects of the government. I'm in the early stages of writing that book, but I hope to have it ready for publishing within the next 7 or 8 months, but it'll probably be closer to a year. Let me just say, and I think most of you will agree, that there's a lot of corruption within our federal government to learn about, to be aware about. And I believe the reader of American Insanity will finish reading this book with a much clearer understanding of just how deep that corruption really goes, and why and how each and every one of us must become involved in holding our government officials accountable if we're to save our constitutional republic. I hope each of you will seriously consider buying a copy of American Insanity to learn the real extent to which our government and news media are failing our republic, and just how much people really don't realize what is going on within our federal government. I want to encourage everyone to visit my website, and that website is americaninsanity.org. That's Americaninsanity, one word, .org, for the links to purchasing my book. Or if you prefer to go straight to the links, those links are American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette at Book Baby Bookshop. For Barnes & Nobles, go to barnesandnobles.com, and in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette. For Amazon purchases, go to amazon.com, and again, in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette. At this point, I'm going to hold up and see if there are any questions that people want to ask. And I see Ben, how does American Insanity explore the concept of political insanity in the United States? And what specific examples or instances does the book highlight? Well, the way I approached it, I approached it by federal departments and federal agencies. And I cover those departments and agencies that have the most impact on the majority of citizens. I talk about corrupt acts committed within those departments by officials within those departments. Sometimes it's corruption, sometimes it's ineptness, but within each department and agency, I do go into specifics and try to address, why these people are behaving in this manner, because there is an agenda. There is a method behind their madness. And I guess I highlight the highest, the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS and the FBI are probably the ones that I get into the weeds, if you may, the deepest, because those are the departments and agencies that are causing us the most amount of problems, which shouldn't be happening in a constitutional republic. Jess, I talk about, to frame this so that you understand, I am an active official, a member of the Convention of States movement, and that's a movement based under Article 5, which allows we, the American citizens, to circumvent our government if they become tyrannic or out of control, as is happening now, and allows us to convene a convention of states to circumvent what they're doing. And there's a whole lot more to it, but if you read my book, you'll learn all about the hows, whys, and whens of that. But the apathy, as an official of the Convention of States, I man booths at flea markets and gun shows, at which we get petition signers to sign petitions to get our state legislators to pass a resolution calling for the Convention of States, which is required in order for us to convene. And it's during serving on those booths that I hear the apathy. How much people don't give a dang about what's going on in the government, how much they feel it doesn't matter what they feel or think or what they do. It's not going to make a difference. Or how they feel that every politician is a crook and is corrupt. So what's the sense of trying? So those are the things I also address in the book. And how does that have impact on our national political scene? It has a tremendous impact, because this apathy is causing people to not go to the voting booth and vote, which undermines our constitutional republic and undermines the intent of our founding fathers, who expected all of us to be actively involved in holding our elected officials accountable. So the impact of the apathy is horrendous. Let me say that. It is horrendous. It also causes people that if they do go to the voting booth, to vote for the same person that they've been voting for election cycle after election cycle, even if they know that person is a part of the big problem in Washington, D.C., because their apathy doesn't seem to allow them to take the time necessary to research the background of the candidates and the people that they vote for. And so it's kind of just like a Russian roulette. I put a bullet in and spin the chamber and hope for the best. And unfortunately, we can see that that way of citizen participation isn't serving our country very well at all. Any other questions or comments? I'm ready. And I think I'm almost out of time, so I had hoped to read a few paragraphs out of my first chapter, which lays out. I'm going to read a couple and hope that Ben doesn't shut me down. My first paragraph starts out, "Have I just awoken to find myself in a twilight zone, a dysfunctional junction in time and space, a place where absurdity is overwhelming common sense, where individuals have become nothing more than hateful, intolerable human beings, incapable of interacting with one another or discussing each other's beliefs and values without disdain towards those with different points of views or opinions? Where am I that the land of the brave can no longer find the courage and the strength to stand against radical woke malcontents determined to bring chaos and uncertainty to our lives, where no matter which way I turn, I find political clowns to one side and woke jokers to the other side, and standing in the middle with me is fear for the future of our children and our nation? Where am I that so much apathy exists among people living in a country which provides so much freedom and opportunities to each one of us, where so many have become so determined to bring down the shining star of the world? Where am I that so many have lost their faith in God and their faith in a nation founded upon Judeo-Christian values? Are there really that many willing to worship at the altar of government, believing that their salvation rests in the hands of a godless and evil government, willing to make slaves of them? I am mentally unable to grasp the reality of this place, because this is not the United States of my youth. Rather, this is a place being consumed by evil." And at that point, Ben, I'm ready to call it a day. I think I've done my 30 minutes, maybe even a little more. So thank you, everybody, and please join me tomorrow. I'll be back on, or not tomorrow, Monday, and I'll be on Monday at 4 o'clock. Thank you for joining me, and you all have a nice weekend. Bye.